Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Retire with Style. I'm Wade,
And I'm not. I'm Alex.
and we're happy you're joining us for episode the next in the series here. The one that I was going to say a number, but I don't know if I suppose it's episode 12. I suppose that's not going
Yeah.
to change at this point. And we're going to
No, no,
be
no.
getting into this idea of a financial implementation matrix today. But before getting into that, Alex, anything new in your world that you want to get off your chest before we start digging into all this?
Sure, Wade. Yes, yes. Uh, Other than I was gonna try to make a funny about the last episode and how I didn't appreciate the way you were speaking to me, but we don't need to air our dirty laundry here in front of everyone. No, no, no. This and incidentally, we're actually recording this one back to back, so it'll be interesting to see how this goes in the podcast world.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's all. That's the only color I can add. Wade.
And the beginning of this episode has a big similarity with the beginning of the previous episode, so we should get through that part a little faster this time, which was just reviewing all these different constructs that we've looked at. That we want to just focus on a different aspect of them today. But it was all those
Yeah.
ideas of the self-efficacy, those weren't those, that's what we got into last time, but the behavioral biases or heuristics, the inertia, the numeracy or the Dunning-Kruger effect, the awareness of one's numeracy, the loss aversion and that idea of a risk tolerance concept, perceived advisor usefulness, and then also how that is controlled for different demographic
Yeah.
characteristics.
Yeah, and we viewed this in the last episode. I mean, we reviewed them in the last episode, so check those out. And we reviewed them within the context of how they affect retirement income concerns, investing behavior, and retirement outlook. Now, one key finding is that there was always this reoccurring theme with regards to the significance of retirement income self-efficacy. Self-efficacy always seems to bubble up in terms of its association with those three outcome variables that the general outcome variable umbrellas that we discussed. And so again, I encourage you check out episode 11 to bone up on it if you're just hitting us new with episode 12. But what's of interest here, and Wade alluded to it earlier, the first few episodes we were, at the start of this podcast series, we were talking about retirement income style awareness and how you needed to have your style. You needed to figure out how you want to source retirement income because that leads to a strategy that resonates with you. Now, once you have the style, and once you know what strategy you want to look into, the whole purpose of this arc has been you need to implement. You need to implement. And so we started looking at these psychological constructs and how does that affect the retirement stuff. And so what we're doing here is we're going to take retirement income self-efficacy, since it was the winner of the bake-off, if you will, and introduce another variable here that we discussed, perceived advisor usefulness. And if you put them together, interesting things happen. Now, before we further speak about this, Wade, I do, maybe it's more my sensitivity than anything, but in this episode, we're effectively going to explore how these factors, how you like to implement your strategy. But keep in mind, Wade and I are principals of McLean Asset Management, and that's a wealth management firm. So obviously, we have our own sets of value that we think we had, but understand, we're not interested in convincing anyone to do one thing or the other. What we're more interested in, over time, what we've concluded, I don't know about you, Wade, I'm not persuasive enough to convince anyone to do something they don't want to do at a very visceral level. But I do think what's important, at least what's a better use of all of our time, is to effectively try to figure out what your own preferences are for how you like to implement financial advice and provide a facilitation of that for that individual. Do you agree, Wade?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I came into financial planning more from the research side. So as I was blogging about retirement topics and so forth, I tended to draw an audience in that didn't always perceive advisor usefulness, perceive that the benefits of working with an advisor exceed the costs. But that's because it was their hobby. If your hobby is personal finance, maybe you feel comfortable doing things yourself. And so I've always had an audience that maybe tilts that way more than the general overall population. But yeah, in that regard, I've always been open to the idea of not everyone wants to work with a financial advisor, but maybe we can help people better figure out when it might be appropriate, when it may not be appropriate.
And if it's not, if you know, it's almost like I don't know, as a kid, you know, you go shopping for clothes with your mom, eventually you go with yourself, etc. And I always hated when people come up to me, can I help you? You know, that kind of thing. I do that. No, I got it, just looking. And to some extent, there could be that kind of vibe going on here. But ultimately, we're just more interested in, if, let's say, if you are a self-directed investor, well, what are some strengths and weaknesses that you may want to know about as you go into this? Because ultimately, we're interested in however you want to utilize and implement financial advice or a financial strategy. That's fine. But if we can help you identifying potential headwinds along the way and what strengths you want to focus on, that's even better. Okay, and so that's how I would take this. And so when we did our research, we really wanted to figure out what's the best predictor of why are we using advisor usefulness. Well, as part of the study, when we looked at all these psychological variables, we wanted to assess what's the best predictor, the most salient predictor of having an advisor, frankly. And looking at all these variables that we discussed earlier, including self-efficacy and advisor usefulness and all the demographic factors with you know, in terms of net worth, age, gender, marital status, the best predictor, I mean the only predictor of this was perceived advisor usefulness. I mean and if you do sort of a predictability model around that, you can kind of predict, you know, with 80% certainty, and that's not those words, 80% and certainty maybe don't go together, but you can predict at a good range, you know, who is most likely gonna be utilizing an advisor. And so that's interesting now, because if we take retirement income self-efficacy, which really highlighted concerns, behaviors, you know, emotional tenor with regards to retirement outlook. And if you then marry that with perceived advisor usefulness, we can start doing things that are very interesting with that, in the same manner that we were able to take probability safety first and optionality commitment orientation and create a RISA matrix. With these two factors, if you will, and Wade, I said it last year, but last episode, but these are the bake-off winners, right? With these two factors, you can really identify, if you will, consumer personas with regards to how they want to implement advice. Interestingly, these are what we're going to talk about aren't things that folks haven't seen before, or they've, you know, maybe they're called different names, but I think it lends itself well to intuition, what we've found. I'll hand it off to you, Wade.
Yeah, and as well, just kind of retirement researcher being a sister firm of McLean Asset Management, I guess we were more open to this kind of conversation or discussion as well, just because we have found ways to try to provide some sort of service to all the different styles, personas, if you will, for this sort of financial implementation. And so, as Alex mentioned, we put together kind of getting this idea of perceived advisor usefulness and the retirement income self-efficacy are the two strong factors coming out of all this discussion. And so we can create a matrix with those in the same way as we created a matrix with the retirement income style awareness. And so what we do is we think of retirement income self-efficacy as the left-right category. So if you're on the left, you have low self-efficacy. If you're on the right, you have high self-efficacy. And then the up-down category is this idea of perceived advisor usefulness. If you're on the top, you perceive that there's a lot of value from working with a financial advisor, that the benefits of working with the advisor exceed the costs for that service. And if you're at the bottom, you do not perceive there being a net positive benefit of working with a financial advisor, that the costs or the charges for that service are greater than any perceived benefit that you would receive from that service.
And at least on an ongoing basis. Now, one little nuance I like to say about self-efficacy as it relates to retirement income is that it's not necessarily a competence thing. I mean, there are some people that, yes, math is kryptonite, and I don't want to look at anything that has to do with numbers from an investment standpoint. Sure. But there's other folks where there's just a general disinterest in it. It's not, it just doesn't sing to me. Or it's, listen, I'd rather just outsource this. So there's many reasons why someone can have low levels of self-efficacy. I just want to say, I feel inclined to say that in case anyone's listening, thinking that I'm competent, so why don't I have self-efficacy in this? It's just, it just doesn't sing to you.
Yeah, there's other things you would rather be doing, potentially.
Yeah.
And so that leads to 4 quadrants in the same manner that we had the 4 quadrants with the retirement income style awareness. So I guess we can go on a tour of the 4 quadrants. Make our way around the matrix.
Should we go counterclockwise, Wade, or No, I'm teasing. Let's begin with a delegator. A delegator is exemplified by, think about high advisor usefulness, but low self-efficacy.
So this is the
think about what that entails.
The upper left-hand
quadrant. This would be, if you're visualizing this, this would be the upper left hand here. And although sometimes, and then I talked about the competence issue, but these folks they want to outsource it at the end of the day, and there it is. I mean, you have a good subset of those as in our work with McLean Asset Management, we have a good subset of folks that are delegators, and it makes sense. They want to know. They don't necessarily want to get into the weeds. They don't necessarily want to know, how the clock is made. They're more interested in just what time is it. And as long as there's a trust and there's a level of good rapport with their advisor, the relationship works out great. But that's a delegator of sorts. High advisor usefulness, low self-efficacy. Makes perfect sense. Collaborator is high usefulness. An advisor's, there's a high degree of advisor usefulness. And with it comes also, because this is now top right, high level of self-efficacy, retirement income self-efficacy. And so we also have this subset of clients at McLean. And these are folks that they're with us, so they feel an advisor is a cost-effective exercise, but they also have a high level of self-efficacy. So they position themselves as like, this is a team approach in which there is a project manager, if you will, but I have a strong say in it in terms of leading, and I really want to get into the contextual underpinnings of what's happening. They want to know, this time around, these folks tend to want to know how the clock works in addition to what time it is, and they want to be able to provide, a lot of guidance. Not that a delegator doesn't, but they have more definitive opinions that they really want to kick around. There's this partnership view.
Yep.
Wade, would you agree?
Yeah, more interaction, more engagement, wanting to be much more involved in the planning process. But still, both the delegators and the collaborators, because they're both in the top half with the high perceived advisor usefulness in terms of benefits exceeding the costs, both of those are looking for that sort of ongoing financial advisory relationship. The level of participation or involvement they want to have in the process is a bit different.
Yeah. Then we continue, and you have here high levels of self-efficacy. So you're on the right-hand side, but low advisor usefulness, so you're towards the bottom. So this is bottom right. And these are the hobbyists. These are, and I don't mean the term hobbyist in a poor way at all. I mean, these folks love it. The term amateur is ultimately loving what you do, right? Something like that, if you break it down in its Latin form. And so these folks, in retirement, this is their thing. This is, in some way, shape, or form, I get the sense that this is like, look, I saved my advisor fee, and this is kind of my job in retirement, and I love this. And so I want to keep at this. And so these folks feel that, the extra value that an advisor brings in is just not worth it to them. It doesn't cross their line. And they feel like they can do it. They have the energy, the enthusiasm, the competence for it, whatnot. And so this is their job in retirement, and they can learn whatever it is that needs to learn. They go to Retirement Researcher and read up, The only caveat here is that, and this is for another day, that person is a sample of one. And so there is a benefit of that the wisdom of a professional brings simply because you have a sample of 1,000 to pick from. But again, this is not a pitch, but this is something that you want to have in the back of your mind. And so to the degree that they can, you know, benefit from the experiences of others, in addition to just, reading, boning up on memorizing effectively Wade's books, there's things you want to do there. Validator. I'll take this one, Wade, just because I think there's a nuance here. This is where there's low advisor usefulness and low self-efficacy. Now, a validator, in my view, implies that it's more of an ongoing relationship. They're not interested in an ongoing relationship because they feel they can there's an implementation piece that they'll just do. But, financial planning in its truest sense can get complicated. There are a lot of moving parts. I mean, yes, I've read the napkin, the one-page financial plan and all that. I get that, but, it is what it is. There's just a lot of moving parts sometimes that need to be taken into consideration when actually implementing a plan. And so those are inflection points, especially around milestone events. Those are inflection points that folks come across. And in those inflection points, if you have low levels of self-efficacy, there's a lot of reading to do. There's a lot of something to do, and you don't want to mess up. And so those folks seek an advisor at that milestone event from a validation standpoint. And this is hey, I want to make sure I'm thinking about this the right way. Can I do a financial plan? Or I want a financial plan, and then from there I'll take it. And so, think Roth conversion strategies, income bridging approaches, delaying Social Security. And this is where a planning specific engagement makes a lot of sense for someone if they're a validator. But the advisor should come with the expectation that this is not an ongoing relationship. This person wants to, like two ships passing in the night. They want that sort of inflection point advice.
Yeah, seeking a one-time guidance when it comes time to make an important decision in retirement. And so just one other point about that self-directed community as well. They're active on the internet, and so a lot of times you'll see on discussion boards that they will say, no one needs a financial advisor. Everyone can learn this for themselves. And that's where it's just important to recognize that, no, not everyone's interest is personal financial planning. If that's your interest, great, but just recognize that some people may want to outsource that and may be able to gain more benefit from an advisor just to save all the time and energy that would otherwise be required if they don't enjoy spending that time or energy on these financial planning problems.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But what we found in our research when we did this is, again, the highest predictor of using an advisor was advisor usefulness. It wasn't necessarily self-efficacy. And I'll get into why we created a matrix around self-efficacy then. But the reality is the higher you were, the more you used an advisor. What self-efficacy is able to shed light on from a persona standpoint is, advisor usefulness takes care of if you're going to use an advisor, but the self-efficacy really sheds light on the type of relationship that person is looking for. Again, there's a big difference between a delegator and a collaborator. There's a big difference between a validator and a self-directed. And said another way, delegators and collaborators both think an advisor is useful, but they both demand different dynamics. Same thing with a validator and self-directed. They both feel that an advisor is not necessarily cost-effective on an ongoing basis, but there's different dynamics that they have to consider from a self-efficacy standpoint that really will signal to them what type of implementation approach may best work. And so in a nice sort of way, it hangs together very nicely. And these are personas, if you will, that if you look at, I don't know how many consumers are listening in versus advisors, but advisors, we get bombarded all the time with like marketing advice and articles and this and that. And it's knowing your personas, knowing your niche, et cetera, which makes total sense. But these are delegators, collaborators, validators, self-directed. We've seen this peppered, not necessarily in this organizational construct or framework, but in much the same way that the RISA was able to identify total return, income protection, strategies that have been floating around, and we gave it an organizing principle. I think here, this financial implementation matrix takes these personas that have been floating around and puts them in this organizing principle framework, if you will, with these variables that I find personally fascinating. Wade?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to add to that comment. It's interesting how this all comes together to just provide a framework for organizing all the different options and seeing how well they fit with these characteristics.
Yeah. And so now, if you have this framework in place and you're thinking about it, and this is I think as eminently important for both the advisor and the individual. Let's say you're a delegator. What may be your pain points? What we found is delegators, there's high longevity concerns. There's a lot of fear of running out of money. And again, this is average, right? This is not every single person, 100% of them, but there seems to be, relative to group differences with other personas, there's a high level of longevity concerns that they have. There's a high level of retirement income anxiety. And, that could be why maybe they want to delegate it off as well, even, countering what I said earlier. It's just, it's emotionally charged, then they want to delegate it to some extent to someone that they trust and they feel is competent. These folks, in our estimation, there's, the meetings should center around reassurance, and not reassurance in terms of affirmations or anything like that, but reassurance from the standpoint of the advice should be given in the context, in its proper planning context. And what I'm getting at is when we've run into problems with these types of folks at McLean, it's they don't even open up their quarterly statements. It's hard to get them into on average, right? It's tough to get them into a once a year cadence in meetings. It's like pulling teeth to some extent, and you can make the case, well, what's the problem, right? Well, we don't. That's not how we like to work with folks. But the issue is that if they come in and they don't look at anything, and then 2 years pass by and they dare open a statement and they see it, and let's say the market just went down, the market had a bad year and a half, then they don't know the context of why they're investing or that there's a plan centered around that, and it's quick. They could be quick to just be like, I'm nervous, I'm out of here. It's not about leaving us or not. It's more, I'm out of the market or something along those lines. And so that's a danger. It's yes, I get it. You don't want it, and fine, outsource it. But the advisor's job and the delegator needs to be very conscious of the contextual reason why they're investing. Because if you constantly can refer back to that, it helps with discipline, especially if you have high levels of anxiety, high levels of longevity concerns, and maybe a proclivity for heuristics. It helps keeps you centered. And so for us, we make sure that there's this focus on retirement income goals, like a goals-based planning approach. It's not the investments aren't in isolation because you can't control that. So if you can always bring it back to this goals-based approach, which is becoming this sort of trendy phrase now all of a sudden, which I'm not a big fan of because we were doing it way back when, right? But if you can bring it back to that, especially for delegators, it's very important for them or for yourself in terms of making sure that you're able to maintain that plan. Wade?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we can talk about this as well with collaborators in terms of what are those other associations that go on. And with collaborators, there is a lower level of retirement income anxiety. They do seem to be more grounded in what they're doing. They may, again, these are all trends, but perhaps they have a higher net worth than some of the other categories as well. And so that's helping. Well, these are some of the relationships we talked about in the previous episode as well, that factors that relate to the retirement income anxiety. So that gives them more, because they also have that self-efficacy, just that desire to have more of that team-based approach to their planning as well.
Yeah. And yeah, this is where, let's say you have a collaborator, right? And I actually enjoy these clients quite a bit because there's a strong relationship. They want to come in for meetings. it's I don't know. At least I am. I'm more gregarious, I guess, than most. But it's always good to have that interaction. And here they seem to be more grounded. It's something I don't know. I can't make too much of it relative to self-directed folks, but they do have on a relative basis a higher net worth collaborators than self-directed folks. And I don't know, Wade. I've always wondered, is that because there's more at stake, so they feel that it's worth based on the risk, the potential risk of getting something wrong, it's worth having somebody as that perpetual sounding board. It's worth having that sort of team approach. I kind of sense that, but that's anecdotal from the dynamics that we've had with our own folks. But it's interesting that collaborators on a relative basis have a higher net worth than self-directed folks. Just
Yeah, that aligns with some of the research out there too that can sound self-serving, that with research that will tend to show that people who work with financial advisors tend to have a higher net worth than people who don't. But we really don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Do they have the higher net worth and then they go to the advisor, or did the advisor actually help them to get the higher net worth?
Oh no, I was thinking of it. I was personally thinking of it from the former.
Yeah, because they have
not so
more
much
at stake to protect what they have.
Yeah, because they have more at stake. And look, the reality is, a point on that. I think maybe on the fringes you can make the case you have a higher net worth because of an advisor, but really, an advisor adds value not because they take, I don't know, $100,000 and turn it into $2 million. That's not the case at all. An advisor adds value because they're able to provide the contextual reasoning for why someone's investing and tie it into a plan. That doesn't necessarily, if you want to increase your net worth, you do that with your human capital, frankly. It's not some sort of investment 10-bagger, kind of thing on average. It's really more your human capital. You did really well with it. Now you have a certain level of wealth and you want to maintain a standard of living. And how can that be done in a meaningful manner? That's the value. I wasn't coming at it from, the advisor increased your net worth because of the wonderful value that was conveyed. I mean, yes, that is the case, but I think it's more that the former. Self-directed. This is somebody, again, here they have higher risk tolerance, which may lead you to think, well, they can, they're more willing to put themselves out there, if you will, doing it themselves. Venturing out on their own is fine. And on a relative basis, their heuristics were in check. I mean, which is surprising. You would think perhaps if you're more self-directed, you're going to have a higher tendency for behavior biases simply because you're just bombarded by them a little bit more and you have less environmental cues to keep you on track. But there could be more to that than what we're seeing in the data. Lower levels of net worth, and this could be, to Wade's point, maybe it's just an overall nominal cost issue. That it's not worth it because relative to my net worth, on a nominal basis, a lot will go out the door, and I don't want that. There's nothing much there. What we do, if you're self-directed, this is where we focus on education, frankly, and this is where Wade and I, we have retirementresearcher.com, which is ultimately a membership site it caters to self-directed folks. I mean, if someone's a collaborator or a delegator, most likely they're going to want to have a relationship with McLean. If they go through, if they encounter us. If somebody is a validator, this is where we didn't offer this before, but as of about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we really started doing one-only financial plans because we realized, we weren't serving a subset of the folks that were coming into our universe, if you will. And for the self-directed folks, we got tired. We didn't want to try to convince anyone to use an advisor when they, at heart, don't feel there's a usefulness factor there. And frankly, we're too busy, and it's not a good use of anyone's time. And so we created this sort of masterclass, if you will, for financial education. And frankly, who better than Wade? And Bob French leads that endeavor for us, Retirement Researcher, which is an education-driven site for self-directed investors. And there, it's really the playbook that we have for McLean, that if you want to do it yourself, have at it. And we feel that's a nice sort of facilitation method for somebody that's a self-directed person. I mean, what we do there beyond the value is a lot of curation and always best practices. For validators, again, I don't know, Wade, do you want to go into this one since I did the last one?
Yeah, well, so in the academy, it's kind of like an online streaming service curated with the content that you can use as you find it relevant to your situation. And then the validator might also have some interest in the academy, but also they have that lower self-efficacy. So it's more a case of, okay, they don't necessarily see the value in paying for an ongoing relationship with an advisor, but they might want some sort of one-time financial plan to answer the questions they need answered at a particular moment. And some of the characteristics we found that are associated with validators are they do have more fear of longevity, of outliving their ability to fund their retirement expenses. They do have less risk tolerance. So they are more worried about the impacts of volatility and so forth. And that can create doubts, or that can create concerns where they're not entirely comfortable doing this on their own, but at the same time, they're looking for something, just not a full-time commitment to something. And so looking for opportunities to get some feedback or some advice to manage particular problems. Maybe it's during the stage of actually leaving work, or maybe it's trying to decide when to claim Social Security benefits, or maybe it's about whether or not to use an annuity as part of the retirement plan. But looking for some sort of one-time interaction that can help them solve the problem and then continue to go on with their retirement.
So those are the four here. So as you can see, all these personas have different sensitivities to the psychological variables that we mentioned, which, again, I think it's a way to quantify what was implicitly out there. And in terms of also providing a little bit of a playbook, if you're an advisor or if you're a self-directed person or validator, in terms of what to look out for as you implement the plan. I think that's important. I can't stress enough. You can do the reset. You can discover your retirement income style. You can map it to a potential strategy. Heck, you can even drill it down further into an actual solution set, right? But if you don't take that step forward, if you don't actually implement it, you're nowhere. And we've, one of the things that, I don't know, breaks my heart is too strong of a word, but one of the things that, that happens with more frequency than not, than you would think, is somebody that has done the research, someone that has identified their strategy, someone that has even done a financial plan. But 2 years later, they come back to us and they haven't really done anything. And so that's what we want to really get at here, this implementation. Figure out, maybe that person that was a validator, they got a plan. Maybe that person was better off as, using a delegator approach or a collaborator approach initially. And so I think matching this is a very much of great importance from a practical application standpoint. Wait.
Yeah, and so this is a inflection point too with the podcast. Alex has been talking about storylines or story arcs, and so we're kind of coming to the conclusion of the first big arc with the podcast, which was going through this psychological research based on the retirement income style awareness and now the financial implementation matrix. And as we continue with the podcast, we'll get into some different topics in the future that are more along the lines of traditional retirement planning topics that everyone loves to discuss. And I think the next big story arc, as people are continuing to tune in, we'll start talking about budgeting and determining your funded status for retirement, preparing your funded ratio, thinking about, are you prepared financially for retirement? And so that's going to be the next big story arc that we get into in subsequent episodes.
It's like season 3 of Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
No, it's true. We did the RISA arc, we did the financial implementation arc, which we just have it here. But as you see, we set ourselves up. The RISA is a starting point. How do you like to implement? Now we need to run the numbers. But think about it. We're 12 episodes in, and we devoted 12 episodes to making sure you get your starting point right, and making sure that you're starting from a point that resonates with you. That's how important we think that is. But now that you know it, now you have to run the numbers to see if it's economically feasible. And so, the next arc will go into helping you determine that.
Absolutely. And
Alrighty?
we don't break this into seasons, but if we did, this would be kind of the cliffhanger into the next season with looking at the numbers, looking at the...
Yes, this is our, since I figured the demographics fit, this is our Who Shot JR cliffhanger.
Not Who Shot Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Yeah, there you go, from The Simpsons. No, I was going back to Dallas.
Yes,
By the way,
that's before my time.
I don't know if you... right. Well, I was kind of a kid when they were... showing that. I never saw it, though. I always opted for The Dukes of Hazzard and The Incredible Hulk. I always missed out on Dallas. Oh, and Fantasy Island. But, all right, everyone. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Take care, everyone.